It was a rainy afternoon in New York, and Barron Trump was in his room, looking out the window as the rain hit the glass hard. The sound of the storm seemed to accompany the chaos in his mind. He had gone through several months of high pressure, with high expectations from his family, his school, and himself. The constant comparison with his father and his world of power made him feel invisible and lost in the middle of a life full of luxuries, but empty of purpose. At that moment, Barron received a call from his mother. It was a short call, without much context, but with a clear instruction. "Barron, they are waiting for you at school. Don't forget your presentation in history class." That afternoon, Barron went to school with a divided mind. He knew he had to fulfill his commitment, but he didn't feel any passion for what he was going to do. The daily routine had absorbed him, and his days seemed to pass without any real challenge. When he arrived at school, Barron walked to his history classroom. Inside, students were chatting amongst themselves, some nervous, some excited. When he entered the room, Professor Reynolds greeted him with a calm but knowing look. He was not a conventional teacher, with a gray beard and a serene presence. He had always been the kind of teacher who seemed to understand his students without needing to ask them questions. Professor Reynolds had taught at many institutions, but he had stayed at this school because of a very personal reason. He wanted to impact the lives of young people in a way that transcended beyond books. He knew that students needed not only knowledge, but also someone to guide them in their lives. Barron's presentation. Barron was ready to give his presentation on ancient Greece, but something inside him was not ready. He stood in front of his classmates, took a sheet of key points, and began to speak. However, his words were empty, just reciting facts and dates that he had memorized. The energy that normally accompanied his public presentations seemed to have disappeared, and for a moment, the room was filled with an awkward silence. Professor Reynolds watched intently from his desk. Seeing Barron's lack of connection to the topic, he decided to step in. He didn't interrupt the presentation, but at the end, he approached young Trump and quietly gave him some advice. It's not just about what you know. It's about why you know it. If you can find your purpose, the rest will follow. Barron was confused by the professor's words, but something in them resonated deeply. The professor hadn't given him direct criticism of his work, but had instead made Barron reflect on his approach to life itself. After class, Barron sat in thought, and as he stepped out into the hallway, Professor Reynolds caught up with him. "Can I talk to you for a moment, Barron?" the teacher asked, his tone friendly but serious. Barron nodded, and the two walked together toward the school grounds. There, the professor began to tell him a story about his own youth. He had been a young man like Barron, with all the potential, but also with many expectations and little direction. Years ago, the professor had been in a similar situation, surrounded by the pressure of having to live up to what others expected of him, but not knowing what he really wanted. It was only when he found his true passion for teaching that the pieces fell into place. History isn't just in books, Barron. It's in what you do with it, how you connect it to your life and the lives of others, Reynolds explained. Barron, who had always been used to receiving advice related to politics or business, had never heard anything so profound. How could someone with so many personal expectations simply find their passion? That seemed to be a luxury he couldn't afford. But for the first time, he felt there was more to life than just doing one's duty. Over the next few days, Barron began to reflect on the conversation with Professor Reynolds. During his history classes, Barron became more interested in the lessons, not because he had to teach them to his class, but because he wanted to understand the connections between past events and the decisions humans made. One day, while reading about ancient civilizations, something inside him lit up. He was interested not just in the what, but in the why. That curiosity led him to spend more time researching outside of school, watching documentaries and reading about historical figures. He not only wanted to learn about the big names in history, but also how small decisions could have a big impact. Professor Reynolds had made Barron realize that great historical moments are born from the passion and vision of the people behind those events. A month later, Barron stood in front of the history class again, this time with a much more personal project. He had decided to research a topic close to his life: the impact of politics on the lives of ordinary people. But it wasn't just a work about facts. It was a deep reflection on how the decisions of leaders affect people who are not in power. Professor Reynolds, upon seeing the project, smiled broadly. Barron had taken the next step. He was not only learning history, but also applying it to his own life and perspective. "That's the purpose, Barron," said the professor, as he reviewed Barron's notes. "Knowledge is not just a means to an end. It's the way to understand and change the world." As the months passed, the relationship between Barron and Professor Reynolds grew stronger. Barron began to feel more confident in himself, not because of what others expected of him, but because of what he had begun to expect of his own future. While his classmates continued to worry about grades and awards, Barron immersed himself in the idea of being able to contribute to the world with something he was truly passionate about. Professor Reynolds, with his quiet wisdom, had accomplished something no one else had. He had sparked Barron's curiosity about his own potential, showing him that the true power of education lies in the ability to connect what we learn with who we are. The impact Professor Reynolds had on Barron went beyond the walls of the classroom. Years later, Barron recalled those conversations at the most difficult times in his life. He knew that, in the end, what really mattered was not following in the footsteps of others, but finding his own path and understanding why he did it. That lesson about purpose had been key in shaping his future. If you've ever felt lost or directionless, remember that true learning isn't found in books alone, but in how we apply that knowledge to make a difference. If this story inspired you, please leave your comments below. We'd love to hear how a teacher or mentor has influenced your life, and don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed this story. Your opinion matters.